Good morning, friends. Welcome back again to Karating. After a short trip out of town, we are back in the village, enjoying our peace and serenity as usual. Now, this morning, I'm just going to show you our morning routine. I'm just getting ready to prepare breakfast for my two supervisors. So I'll walk you through that while discussing another interesting returnee related topic. And that is going to focus specifically on people who can return to Kenya but choose not to. I've heard statements like, I will never go back to Kenya. And so today I'm going to talk about some of the things that actually keep us glued to diaspora. Because while some of us strongly advocate for moving back to the village or moving back to Kenya, there is a significant segment of Kenyans who choose not to return even when they can. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think people should do whatever works for them. And so in this video, I'm just going to walk you through how people arrive at that decision. So as you watch this video, I'm going to go through the morning routine and also include a segment where I'm showing the wainscoting works in one of the residences we are working on here in Garateng. Now, folks in diaspora, whether they're living in the US, Europe, or in other countries, are very diverse, both in terms of cultural background, their economic circumstances, pathways to diaspora, hometowns, connections to diaspora, and so many things. So we are really different, while also share a lot in common. But there's this specific group of folks who, for whatever reason, choose not to come back to Kenya. Many of them actually move, live abroad, die, and are buried out there. And so people often wonder what makes people stick to diaspora even when they really can. Because many people who can't come back, it's generally often because they either don't have the papers or economically they don't have the means to move back. And so there's this specific group of folks who have the money, they can buy tickets, they can come back, they have papers, but they choose not to come back. So I'm going to walk you through a number of reasons why this is the case, or simply highlight some of the things that keep us tied to diaspora, even for those of us who keep going back and forth. So reason number one is that the truth is, as many folks already know, that diaspora can really come with certain comforts. Comforts that for some of us who move to diaspora as adults can be very enticing. Something that in Kenya we describe as soft life. So one of those is you may have a job that is really comfortable, pays you really well, or you have some kind of a hustle that pays really well. And also folks who are able to enjoy some decent living arrangements in terms of home ownership or an apartment. So folks whose living arrangements are far better than what they had before they leave. Other folks can be comfortable because of the access to great healthcare. Oh, don't get me wrong. American healthcare system is probably one of the worst I've seen out in the diaspora. However, depending on the type of work you do, folks or individuals may have really a lot of access to good healthcare. And so if you're one of those people who are lucky, who is doing a job that gives you great healthcare, then there's good reason to stick around. And of course, when you're thinking about public services like police, ambulance, or even bribe-free government services, where I can simply walk into a government office and not have to pay somebody to do a job that they're already being done. So access to relatively quality public services can make some of us be very comfortable. And then, of course, you're talking about reliable utilities, power, water, internet, and all that. However, some of you may be surprised that sometimes we have problems with the utilities like power, internet, and all that. And that usually happens whenever we have inclement weather. But outside of unusual weather, typically the utilities are expected to be reliable. Now, of course, many diaspora spaces or countries have amazing outdoor spaces, great public parks, beaches, and things like that are often very free, very clean, and really enjoyable. Like where I live in Long Beach, one of the best things about Long Beach is amazing outdoor spaces. And that can make somebody feel comfortable. Related to that is also recreational facilities. Where I live, there's probably more than 10 parks. We have Disneyland about 15 minutes from where I live. We have Legoland, you have Hollywood. There's a lot of recreational facilities around that a lot of our kids grow up around, and they really enjoy them. At home, we have far fewer of those facilities. And then, of course, the better infrastructure. A lot of places have really good road networks, rail, and things like that. But I also must add that, yes, in America, we have places with really terrible roads. LA is one of those places. And of course, the idea of having experienced some systems that work. For example, in America, when I'm getting close to retirement, I don't expect to go bribe a government officer to process my retirement work. Unlike in some countries which I will not mention, you have teachers who retired 20 years ago. And because, excuse me, because they have not paid bribes, their entitlement around retirement is not offered. Or even a court system that you can rely on, especially if you can afford it. So having experienced systems that work to some degree can really glue folks to America. Because if you come back home and you experience the exact opposite, and you ask yourself, why should I suffer all this when I don't have to? And then folks who tend to stick around the US longer can be folks who move to the US as kids. So the majority of their lives they really spent in the US as opposed to those of us who left as adults. So many of these folks have very little attachment to Kenya compared to us. And most of their really best memories are tied to their lives in diaspora. Now, for village folks like us, the majority of our excellent memories are in Kenya. And so it's really easy to have a very strong attachment to Kenya. Some of these folks who never come back often do so because, in part, that being black in America in limited circumstances can also be advantageous. Now, I also want to add that being black in America can be very dangerous. But in limited circumstances, there are benefits to being black. For example, there may be scholarships that are designed just for black folks. There's some employers who are looking to diversify their pool, and they would be excited to hire a highly qualified black person. And of course, among women, there are myths around black male partners. Now, because my channel is a family channel, I may not say much about that, but please shut up. You already know what I'm talking about. Now, some folks also just love black people. In Africa or in Kenya, being black necessarily is not a distinguishing feature that makes you unusually desirable. But yes, there are spaces, very limited spaces in diaspora where being black can be advantage. But don't forget that being black in diaspora can be a very dangerous thing in many respects. Now, the folks that also tend to stick around diaspora for a long time too often have extensive networks within diaspora, whether it's family or friends. And so they have little incentives to create new networks outside diaspora. Some of them, of course, like myself, benefited a lot from the education system in the US. We got graduate assistantships, tuition assistance, free education up to high school. And so those are things that may not come easy when you're back home here. And of course, in graduate school, one of the biggest benefits was that our programs were relatively shorter, and it was easy to go through graduate school. And I'm saying this in comparison to some of my friends who've gone through graduate school in Kenya. Tons of kids programs like summer camps and all that I don't know. I just don't know the options there are that are comparable in Kenya, but I'm sure they are. And then the idea of opportunities to thrive. In specific circumstances, my tribe does not matter in the US. My tribe does not limit me in the US. In the same way that I would say that in Kenya, my tribe or my last name would really limit me. So moving to diaspora where nobody knows what my tribe really means, we like that because then you have slightly fewer problems to worry about. And of course, these folks who tend to stay in diaspora have very little desire to come back home, just in general. And for them, it could be because their lives in Kenya may have been far worse than it is in the diaspora. And of course, the folks who stick around in diaspora, many of them have changed quite a bit culturally. And they tend to think more like Americans than they do as Africans. Some of them are involved in politics. I actually have friends who have run for elective positions. And so if you're going to run for elective positions, coming back to Kenya may not be convenient in regards to achieving that goal. A few of these folks have really distorted images of what Kenya is. We talk about suffering and disease and all that, but that's a very small groups. Now, the other unique issue is that Kenyans who are married to non-Kenyans are less likely to be prone to wanting to move back home. In part because our spouses who are non-Kenyan may not share the same enthusiasm we have about returning to Kenya. And of course, green card holders, there are restrictions as to how long they can be outside the US, and so that may make it difficult for them to move back. Now, the other unique thing about Kenyans who hardly come back home is all about work. In America, as many of you already know, people work like crazy. Many folks don't even go for vacation. In fact, some of them see vacation as an opportunity to lose money. And so I've seen Kenyans who work like round the clock. And so taking time to move back to Kenya means loss of money. So that may make it difficult for them to want to come back. So one may ask, what is unique about this group that never comes back to Africa? Are there any potential problems or potential risks? I might say that the answer to that question will all depend on a person's circumstance. But there are about 6 different things that I know are potential problems that may be associated with folks who belong to this club. And of course, the club I'm talking about is folks who can move back but choose not to. The first problem is that if this individual ever change their mind later on in life, then they're screwed. Because I have a friend right now who is 67, just retired, never wanted to come back, but now he has changed his mind, he wants to move back. And he's starting from scratch. He's so far behind that chances of him failing are very high. So that's one risk. The second risk is that living in diaspora, yes, you can assimilate, you can change, but you almost never fully belong. There's always that sense of I am a foreigner. And then, of course, the family that is left in Kenya is often very disappointed. In fact, folks who never travel back to Kenya are often used as bad examples. So the family members will always say, don't be like so-and-so who left like 40, 50 years ago and never came back. So family members left in Kenya are often very disappointed about folks who never come back. And of course, if you leave Kenya and you never come back, chances are you're more likely to lose whatever property you may have left. I've seen folks who left wives, who moved on, who left ancestral land that was sold off, and so many things. So most likely you're going to lose whatever it is that you left back. Now, the worst of it all is that sticking in diaspora could mean the potential for homelessness. Because the truth is, many of us in diaspora are only 2 paychecks away from homelessness. If you miss 2 paychecks, there's no way to pay your mortgage or your rent. In the village, it is highly unlikely that a person will be homeless, in part because of all the supports available. So that's one risk that happens to people who never come back. Well, as always, I hope this video was informative enough. If it was informative, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next. Thank you.